So I just finished reading my Year of Rest and Relaxation. So I am officially one of the girls now, but we already knew that. This video is basically a little slumber party where we're just gonna hang out and we're gonna talk about my Year of Rest and Relaxation and politics. Bring your little stuffy. I brought Bear here. Obviously, Bear has been with me a long time. It looks like I abuse Bear, but I swear Bear and I have a very loving relationship. And, to be loved is to be changed. So we love Bear. No hate to Bear. Okay, so I don't really want to give a whole summary to the book. If you're interested, just read the Wikipedia, read the book itself. I don't know. You don't even have to go buy it. I didn't buy it. I got mine from the library. Please use the library. The library is amazing. She's a privileged white girl living on the Upper West Side. Her parents died. She's super depressed because of it, and she has no friends except for this one girl, Riva, who is her foil. Whereas she is this hot, intellectual kind of girl who's depressed and just loves to rot in her bed all day and do nothing. Riva, her only friend, is obsessed with working out. She's bulimic. She can't seem to have all the nice things that our main character does. Our main character, she was working as a receptionist in this art museum in Chelsea. She decides after she gets fired from this job that she's going to spend a whole year sleeping as much as she can because she wants to be reborn. And she does this by taking pills that her psychiatrist gives to her. There ends up being a complication where one of these experimental pills that her doctor gives her makes her black out for days, and then while she's blacked out, she'll run around and do things. She's upset by the fact that she's doing things when she's asleep because the whole point is that she should be completely knocked out. And so she decides wait, I can make this work to my advantage by locking myself in my apartment, taking these blackout pills, and just fixing it to where I'll wake up every 3 or 4 days, have a little food, do a little bit of stretching, clean myself, and then just get right back down to sleeping. She decides she's just going to sleep for as much as possible on this new experimental drug because she wants to be reborn, and it works. She has this kind of mystical experience where she feels that she dies and is kind of reborn, and then she looks around at the world, and the world is so full of beauty, and she sees things that she didn't before, and the book ends, and you've been kind of guessing that it was leading toward this because it was set during 2000 into 2001. The book ends with 9/11.
9/11 was bad.
I agree with that.
When I first got a hold of the book and started reading it, I thought oh, she just is wanting to commit suicide. There's this one section here where she talks about how it's not suicide what she's doing. Riva, her friend, shows up and she says, "I was both relieved and irritated when Riva showed up. The way you'd feel if someone interrupted you in the middle of suicide. Not that what I was doing was suicide. In fact, it was the opposite of suicide. My hibernation was self-preservational. I thought that it was going to save my life." She doesn't want to die, really. She just doesn't want to stay alive in the world that she's been living thus far. You start seeing how depressed this girl really is. And she's at work napping. She just keeps napping at work. This is how she gets fired. She'll just go down into the basement cellar of her museum job and just pass out. At work, I took hour-long naps in the supply closet under the stairs during my lunch breaks. Napping is such a childish word, but that was what I was doing. The tonality of my night sleep was more variable, generally unpredictable, but every time I laid down in that supply closet, I went straight into black emptiness, an infinite space of nothingness. I was neither scared nor elated in that space. I had no visions, I had no ideas. If I had a distinct thought, I would hear it, and the sound of it would echo and echo until it got absorbed by the darkness and disappeared. There was no response necessary, no inane conversation with myself. It was peaceful. A vent in the closet released a steady flow of fresh air that picked up the scent of laundry from the hotel next door. There was no work to do, nothing I had to counteract or compensate for because there was nothing at all, period. Period. And yet I was aware of the nothingness. I was awake in the sleep somehow. I felt good, almost happy, but coming out of the sleep was excruciating. My entire life flashed before my eyes in the worst way possible, my mind refilling itself with all my lame memories, every little thing that had brought me to where I was. I tried to remember something else, a better version, a happy story maybe, or just an equally lame but different life that would at least be refreshing in its digressions, but it never worked. I was always still me. Sometimes I woke up with my face wet with tears. The only times I cried, in fact, were when I was pulled out of the nothingness, when the alarm on my cell phone went off. Then I had to trudge upstairs, get coffee from the little kitchen, and rub the boogers out of my eyes. It always took me a while to readjust to the harsh fluorescent lighting. So when she starts to really commit to sleeping, it really is not that she's trying to die. She wants to be reborn. She wants to escape the life that she has, the mundane life that like is not rewarding. I think it's at this point that we can start drawing attention to the fact that like this book is about nihilism. There is no values for this girl to hold on to, and it seems like between the art world, between her relationships that she has either with men or her friend Riva or the future, it all just feels like nothingness. It's interesting because I think that there's this tension within her where she both like wants to be reborn and wants to die, and it just ends up turning into this kind of like numbing, repetitive thing that I think we all can kind of relate to, where we don't really like believe in much. We're just trying to like experience pleasures in this world, but like they're starting to become more and more dissatisfying because we're just focusing on ourselves here. Okay, so like what nihilism is, I think can be really explained by like Nietzsche, and so I'm going to read this little passage. When modes of thought and action which are informed by a particular orientation or arrangement of symbols come up abruptly against anomalies in experience or problems which cannot be encompassed by existing symbols and forms of understanding, it may require a revaluation of the prevailing paradigms or assumptions about reality which govern activity. Social action changes when the images which orient and justify it no longer meet the demands of life, and when such demands create new commitments, or when the vision of creative individuals confronts operative assumptions and introduces new symbols and forms which subvert existing images. Nihilism describes a condition in which there is a disjunction between our experience of the world and the conceptual apparatus we have at our disposal, which we have inherited to interpret it. As such, the experience of a metaphysical, moral crisis in which our habits and traditions no longer sustain us is not specific to the modern age, but characterizes any epoch in which a fundamental transformation in self-understanding takes place, such as the collapse of the mythical foundations of ancient Greece, for example. For Nietzsche, it is important not to mistake the symptoms or experience of nihilism for its causes. Some of the symptoms he speaks of include social distress, physiological degeneration, corruption, widespread pessimism, and so on. Our present experience of nihilism is the result of a particular interpretation of the world and of human existence, which has governed the cultural horizon of Occidental humanity for nigh on 2,000 years, the Christian moral interpretation of the world. Okay, so nihilism is brought about basically once like the paradigms in which we understood the world have like become suspicious and we no longer really like believe in them. And I think one of the ones that like we can experience individually is realizing like the activities that I'm doing in my day don't give me any real meaning. I don't trust in them. She, I think, is experiencing it because of her like parents dying, but the book is also drawing attention to like the wider scope of this nihilism, that it's not really just her nihilism, but it's kind of like this nihilism that has set in to American culture after like the initial neoliberal boom of like the Reagan era, right? The Eastern Bloc falls. We don't really have any like competition as far as like political ideologies is going for, and we enter into this era of austerity, privatization, neoliberalism, but it becomes kind of like unsatisfying and strange, and it's this hollow experience of what Francis Fukuyama called the end of history, where we're like, okay, capitalism and democracy as it exists now with like representative governments is kind of the best thing that we got, you know? And like, it's kind of sad because well, what do we really have to live for but like the weekend? You know what I mean? And like American Psycho, Fight Club are all about this. There's no alternative to capitalism. This world is like kind of lame, like my lame life, this lame world. I just want to like lay down and do nothing until I'm like reborn or whatever. And I think that this is also like our own nihilism where we just want to like lay down and do nothing until like things change instead of realizing that we have to do something if anything's going to happen. I have friends who literally think that like things are wrong because they are now forced to think about politics, right? And for them, like a symptom of a bad government or a bad political situation is that like they're having to think about these things, and if politics was good, then they just wouldn't have to think about them. Like things would be taken over by the professional class and they wouldn't have to engage. It's like if you really think that good politics or like the state is good once you as a political subject no longer even have to like think about it, then you have become what Nietzsche called like the last man. And it's so funny because this book is basically like, wait, is the last man the last woman? When you no longer feel like you have to engage politically with anything or really do anything on the world stage, and you're just like living in this liberal society where you hope that the state is just going to be this entity that like helps to make everyone's life better, rather than like the state promoting evolution, promoting like higher forms that we can strive for. then you're basically just like wanting to live a life where you have these pleasures and these like day-to-day things that are so banal and philistine. Nothing's really moving you, nothing's really challenging you, and that's the point. You don't want to be challenged, you don't want to be forced to really do anything. And Nietzsche ends his description of the last man by saying, and the thing that they hope for at the end of the day is a kind of drug-induced death, right? They don't want to die in any kind of like meaningful, heroic way. They just want to die because some like drug helped them to pass and slip easily into death. And I just think that's so funny because I feel so much like what this book is. So her nihilism is expressed in how she reacts to the art world and her realization that like, you know, if we're in the end of history, if we are not really challenged by art and art is just reduced to like a commodity, then art is meaningless. Art is just this commodity that is passed between people for like clout and you know, looking like they have cultural capital. And so there's this section here where she says, I would have preferred to forget the names and details of the people I'd met in Chelsea. The art world had turned out to be like the stock market, a reflection of political trends and the persuasions of capitalism, fueled by greed and gossip and cocaine. I might as well have worked on Wall Street. Speculation and opinions drove not only the market, but the products. Sadly, the values of which were hinged not to the ineffable quality of art as a sacred human ritual, a value impossible to measure anyway, but to what a bunch of rich assholes thought would elevate their portfolios and inspire jealousy and, delusional as they all were, respect. I was perfectly happy to wipe out all that garbage from my mind.
I'm not fucking leaving!
Art can have no social value in this world where it's just been reduced to culture, right? There's no truth behind it. And in our age, our postmodern age, that like is really skeptical about the word truth, the idea that art would have any truth behind it is just kind of like meaningless. It doesn't make any sense. And I think that this really resonates with Alain Badiou's thought about how art is reduced to culture. And by culture, he just means like, you know, a bunch of rich assholes, like she was saying, who are just, you know, they don't care about the art, they don't care about the ineffable or like really beauty. They just care about stacking their portfolios or making themselves look good. Badiou relates the same trend that's going on between art's reduction to culture is also happening within the other conditions of truth that he says exist, that philosophy must defend. And those conditions are art, science, politics, and love. And he says that like in each one of these registers, the idea of truth or the idea of an idea has been like divorced from it. And now the only thing that's in its place is just like individual markets, individual people who like all have a right to their own voice. And you hear this a lot in like multiculturalism. So it's not just in art that this is happening, it's also like the idea as such is something that is leached away from the nihilistic world, right? Like nihilism is marked by this suspicion of great ideas, of truth as such. And so Badiou says, um, the world as such is defined for Badiou by the imperatives of communication and interest, of communal relations or links, of a mere preservation in being. As developed at some length in a recent book, Badiou's assessment of our world, our present situation, is unequivocal. Two defining trends emerge. First, as we might expect, is the progressive reduction of the question of truth, and so of thought, to the linguistic form of judgment, a tradition which coincides and culminates in cultural and historical relativism. This cultural relativism recognizes no other form of truth than the lived particularity of specific designated groups, in particular groups made up of passive victims of one kind or another, duly specified according to language, race, nation, religion, or gender. Second, the only unifying mechanism behind this collection of subsets of the oppressed is the false universality of monetary abstraction, the undivided rule of capital. There is no place for truth in such a world. Culture takes the place of art, technology replaces science, management replaces politics, and sexuality replaces love. The resulting cluster, culture, technology, management, sexuality, is perfectly homogeneous with the market it feeds. Such pseudo-values, Badiou concludes, define nothing other than a being for death, or mere life as judged by the transient trivia of its desiring mortality. And so the character sees art as just as hollow as her own life. And this is important because like later on, after she's reborn, and we're about to get to the end of the book when 9/11 happens, which is like the emergence of history back into the being of the world that like never has events take place. Right before that, she has an experience with art with the artwork inside of like a museum that makes her realize like, oh, art does have meaning. Life does have meaning insofar as I want it to have meaning. So I wanted to bring up and compare a book by Komono Chōmei, who was this like hermit monk in Japan during its medieval period. And I think that it is ironically really indicative of the idea of nihilism that Nietzsche was talking about. It's so funny when people think about nihilism and Nietzsche, they think about like the nihilism that comes about because we lived as a Christian civilization for so long, and then we like can't believe it in anymore, and so we swing from like absolute faith to like absolute skepticism. But Nietzsche thinks of nihilism almost in a like metaphysical, natural sense. Like even individual beings go through nihilism. Whole worlds can like go through nihilism, and like nihilism is like a transitional phase that is just always potentially around and not just like indicative of modernity. And so I think that Komono Chōmei writes this book about how he decides to leave Japanese civilization, leave the capital, and become a hermit in his old age. He decides to do it because he is really fixated on the impermanence of things. And in Japanese, it's called mujo, and it's an important concept in Buddhism, which is there are these things that the Buddha talked about, the three marks of existence: anicca, anatta, and dukkha. Um, Mujo, or impermanence, is anicca, and Chōmei, when he was living like within civilization, saw horrible, decimating, like natural disasters that just ruined civilization. He also saw how like the shogunate was taking over following the Heian period and like disrupting the whole social fabric of things, and it just leads him to this total like distrust of civilization as such. It opens with these famous lines, which are just talking about impermanence in the form of a river, right? On flows the river ceaselessly, nor does its water ever stay the same. The bubbles that float upon its pools now disappear, now form anew, but never endure long. And so it is with people in this world and with their dwellings. So he goes from like seeing impermanence in the natural world in the form of this river to saying like, and this is also true with people in their lives, with all of civilization. And it leads him to have like this total distrust of like, why do people stake so much of their lives on things that are just going to be destroyed? He goes on to say, where do they come from, these newborn? Where do the dead go? I do not know, nor do I know why our hearts should fret over these brief dwellings, or our eyes find such delight in them. An owner and his home vie in their impermanence, as the vanishing dew upon the morning glory. The dew may disappear while the flower remains, yet it lives on only to fade with the morning sun. Or perhaps the flower wilts while the dew still lies. But though it stays, it too will be gone before the evening. The man was sad as hell, and like, I don't blame him. It's just like, damn. A lot of the beginning part of the book is him just describing like the horror of the natural disasters and the things that happen. He's describing a fire in Higuchi no Koji, where the flames spread hither and yon on the fickle wind, fanning out wide over the city. Houses beyond were choked with smoke, while from those nearby, flames spouted and sparks rained down. Clouds of ash poured up into the sky, lit red by the fire beneath. In the midst of all this blazing scarlet, the ragged flames leaped whole blocks at a time, flying unresisting on the wind. For those caught up in the blaze, it must have seemed a nightmare. Some fell, choked with smoke. Others were blinded by the flames and quickly perished. Where others managed to escape with their life, they left behind them all their worldly goods. All those countless treasures were turned to dust and ashes. How much was lost, all told? It's it's funny too, because though he saw all these like horrible natural disasters that people went through, he also witnessed how they quickly forgot about them, and he almost wishes that like they could have been like him and harnessed the wisdom of what impermanence shows you about the world. But he says like, at the time, all spoke of how futile everything was in the face of life's uncertainties, and their hearts seemed for a while a little less clouded by worldliness. But time passed, and now, years later, no one so much as mentions that time. He obviously like wishes that they almost did something that like he did, which was like really hold on to impermanence and let it change them. But it seems like even the knowledge of impermanence is impermanent. This resentment finds even further expression where he goes on to say, basically that like civilization as such is kind of like cursed. But like nature is so pure, but that like mankind in social situations will always like be marked by resentment and disparities of power and like all the rest of it. He says, imagine you are someone of no account who lives next to a powerful man. There may be something that deeply delights you, but you cannot go ahead and express your joy. If something has brought you terrible grief, you cannot raise your voice and weep. You worry over your least action and tremble with every move you make, like a sparrow close to a falcon's nest. Or take a poor man who lives next to a rich one. Ashamed at the sorry sight he makes, he is forever cringing obsequiously before his neighbor as he comes and goes. He must witness his wife and children and his servants filled with envy, and have to hear how the neighbor despises him, and each fresh thought will unsettle him so that he has not a moment's tranquility. If you live in a cramped city area, you cannot escape disaster when a fire springs up nearby. If you live in some remote place, commuting to and fro is filled with problems, and you are in constant danger from thieves. A powerful man will be beset by cravings. One without family ties will be scorned. Wealth brings great anxiety, while with poverty come fierce resentments. Dependence on others puts you in their power, while care for others will snare you in the worldly attachments of affection. Follow the social rules, and they hem you in. Fail to do so, and you are thought as good as crazy. Where can one be, what can one do, to find a little safe shelter in this world and a little peace of mind? Oh, he's so sad. So he ends up leaving civilization, leaving the world that he sees as cursed, and just like living in his hovel. He reflects on how like being alone out there is full of such joy, and he says, on quiet nights the moon at my window recalls to me past friends, and tears wet my sleeve at the cries of the monkeys. The fireflies in the nearby grass blend their little lights with the fishermen's fires. The sound of dawn rain comes to me like a storm wind in the treetops. When I hear the soft cry of the pheasant, it seems to me my own father or mother. The mountain deer that have learned to come so close reveal to me how distant from the world I have become. There are times when I stir the embers of my fire to keep me company in the wakefulness of old age. There is nothing to fear from this mountain. The owl's cry is poignant to my ears, and through the seasons I never tire of the mountain's moving beauties. And for one who thought and understood more deeply still than I, this place would surely hold yet greater joys. He goes on to extol being isolated and extol being a hermit by saying when you're alone, no one can judge you. When you're alone, even if you are say bad at playing an instrument, well, there's no one there to hear you and no one to blame you. He says, I love my tiny hut, my lonely dwelling. When I chance to go down into the capital, I am ashamed of my lonely beggar status. But once back here again, I pity those who chase after the sordid rewards of the world. If any doubt my words, let them look to the fish and the birds. Fish never tire of water, a state incomprehensible to any but the fish. The bird's desire for the forest makes sense to none but birds. And so it is with the pleasure of seclusion. Who but one who lives it can understand its joys? Methinks the lady doth protest too much, because in the following passage, and this is the ending, so sorry for the spoiler, he doubts the entire reason why he came out there. And he basically says, am I running away from something? Am I going mad out here? I remember when I first read this ending, it made me gasp, and it stuck with me for weeks. Like the moon that hangs above the mountain's rim, my life now tilts towards its close. Soon I will enter the darkness of the three paths. What point is there in mulling over past actions? The Buddha's essential teaching is to relinquish all attachment. This fondness for my hut I now see must be error, and my attachment to a life of seclusion and peace is an impediment to rebirth. How could I waste my days like this, describing useless pleasures? In the quiet dawn I ponder this, and question my own heart. You fled the world to live among the forest and mountains in order to discipline the mind and practice the Buddhist way. But though you have all the trappings of a holy man, your heart is corrupt. Your dwelling may aspire to be the hut of the holy Vimalakirti himself, but the practice you maintain in it cannot match even that of the fool Sudipantaka. Have you, after all, let the poverty ordained by past sins distract you, or have your delusions tipped you over into madness? When I confront my heart thus, it cannot reply. At most, this mortal tongue can only end in 3 faltering invocations of the holy, unapproachable name of Amida. The poor guy. Yeah, he realizes, rightfully so, that maybe him just wanting to isolate himself and seclude himself in his little hut had nothing really to do with following the Buddha way, and just basically running from his past actions because he was embarrassed and ashamed by them. His idea of these pleasures out there of being alone are maybe just delusions that are bringing him closer to madness. And it ends with him invoking Amida, which is the Buddha of the Pure Land, that for anyone who has faith in him, he will deliver them into his Pure Land where they can practice to become a Buddha themselves. He invokes Amida with his as he says, basically sinner's tongue. This he can't really come close to it. And it's just damn, he realized he didn't really follow the Buddha way. And I think it's because he divorced himself from the world. He divorced himself from other people because he lost faith in it, because he thought like it's just marked by impermanence and so I have to leave it behind. But ironically, as he says, by letting go of the impermanent social world, he became over attached to his isolation. And I'm going to risk a comparative literature moment to say that like that is the same thing that's going on with our nameless narrator in My Year of Rest and Relaxation. She leaves the world behind because she says like it's useless, it's hollow, it's whatever. But after she's reborn, she realizes like I was so corrupted by like my sadness about my parents' loss, my sadness about the world being so meaningless that like I chose to isolate myself. But like by isolating myself, I become like nobody, I become nothing. And like she wants to be reborn into the world where she can start being with it again. And I just thought that was fascinating. This like parallel between nihilism, all the way from like medieval Japan to, you know, a femme cell in the Upper West Side. All right, let's wrap this up. The Ambien is starting to kick in. It is so funny though. Like she takes so many pills, and I'm not a doctor or anything, but I'm like, hello, how are you still breathing? Yeah, she goes through her rebirth moment, and she like steps back into the world, and suddenly she's kind of like this almost like Rousseauian blank slate. Like everything is so beautiful, everything is so new. She finds like beauty in the mundane, in the small things, like all around her. We're coming to the close of the book. I think we all know that like 9/11 is coming, and right before it happens, she goes to like an art museum. And I think this passage is really interesting because it shows art is something that is meaningful only if it has like a future, only if like history is broken up, either the history of one's own individual life, the mere repetitiveness of it is broken up by like an event or something actually happening. And that this is also what happens at the end once 9/11 happens, at like a macroscopic scale. So she's inside of the Met and she's looking at these still lives and still life paintings, and she's saying like, I got the feeling that if I moved the frames to the side, I'd see the artist watching me, as though through a two-way mirror, cracking their arthritic knuckles and rubbing their stubbled chins, wondering what I was wondering about them, if I saw their brilliance, or if their lives had been pointless, if only God could judge them after all. Did they want more? Was there more genius to be wrung out of the turpentine rags at their feet? Could they have painted better? Could they have painted more generously, more clearly? Could they have dropped more fruit from their windows? Did they know that glory was mundane? Did they wish they'd crushed those withered grapes between their fingers and spent their days walking through fields of grass, or being in love, or confessing their delusions to a priest, or starving like the hungry souls they were, begging for alms in the city square, with some honesty for once? Maybe they'd lived wrongly. Their greatness might have poisoned them. Did they wonder about things like that? Maybe they couldn't sleep at night. Were they plagued by nightmares? Maybe they understood, in fact, that beauty and meaning had nothing to do with one another. Maybe they lived as real artists, knowing all along that there were no pearly gates. Neither creation nor sacrifice could lead a person to heaven. Or maybe not. Maybe in the morning they were aloof and happy to distract themselves with their brushes and oils, to mix their colors and smoke their pipes, and go back to their fresh, still lives without having to swat away any more flies. Step back, please, I heard a guard say. I was too close to the painting. Step away. The notion of my future suddenly snapped into focus. It didn't exist yet. I was making it, standing there, breathing, fixing the air around my body with stillness, trying to capture something, a thought, I guess, as though such a thing were possible, as though I believed in the delusion described in those paintings, that time could be contained, held captive. I didn't know what was true, so I did not step back. Instead, I put my hand out. I touched the frame of the painting, and then I placed my whole palm on the dry, rumbling surface of the canvas, simply to prove to myself that there was no God stalking my soul. Time was not immemorial. Things were just things. Ma'am, the guard yelled, and then there were hands gripping my shoulders, pulling me to the side. That was all that happened. Sorry, I got dizzy, I explained. That was it. I was free. So this moment shows, like, there is a thought inside of this painting, there is an idea in it of, like, life beyond just what she calls the immemorial idea, that this, like, still life is something that captures a life or a being in the world that is just still and unmoving. Its being is just flat. And she realizes, like, once she touches it and, like, gets into it, that, like, the artist probably had desires for things to change, for their own life to be a certain way, that these fruits that are in this painting are like changing and withering and all that. She realizes like my future is also not this flat, continuous like picture, but it's actually something alive. And so when she touches the painting, she realizes like there is an idea behind this painting, there is thought, there is futurity within it, right? This idea that there is futurity is something that was expressed at a global stage once 9/11 happened. the world that was like existing up until 9/11 happened, America, or the Western like developed world at large, was one that was so secure in its power, but was like decaying and rotting at the same time underneath it. You see this like distrust of yuppie suburbanism, things like white noise. It's just idea that like we're consumers now and that's it. All we are just like these liberals, and I don't mean that in like the sense that you're either a liberal or conservative, but liberal in like the broad sense that like we're all kind of like liberals now, in that like we all respect and value like your private interests and like your individual trajectory, but that's kind of like hollow within a world where there's no real future, there's no real choices or freedom. Once 9/11 like happened, it showed America and it showed the world at large that like there still is futurity, there still is events to take place, and that like we are responsible. We have to join the world stage and become subjects again, as Badiou would say. That just means like people that are driven by this kind of like truth that there is a future and that we have to be committed to it, to doing something. We can't just be like in our bed rotting. We can't just be like hoping, oh, I don't want to do anything, hopefully things will just change, or like I just want to like doom scroll in my bed all day. Like, no, you're gonna actually have to get up and do something because you are a social being. And when you isolate yourself and you're just like stuck in your goon cave, you're gonna realize that like time becomes flat and there's no meaning. It's just this repetitive circle that you're just going over and over, and you're the hamster in the wheel, and it's like, ew, get rid of the hamster, disgusting. She realizes this, and I think it's also beautiful that like this coincides with her loving Riva finally, this friend that she has been saying like she only keeps around because she basically shows her how much better her life is, and like how she's not this like pathetic creature. She finally like realizes like, no, I do love Riva, and I think this love, and I think like the book exploring how like love and politics and art are all these things that involve us being attached to the future as a thing to create, is brought about by this like movement away from us just saying, I'm just this individual person with a private interest that has no real stake in the world, and I'm just going to go about my day and do my thing, and like nothing's going to really happen, nothing's really going to challenge me, and I hope to just like live this flat plateau of a life until I, take a drug-induced death. And it also reminds me of like Nietzsche's idea that like the future or our lives are something, and the values that come from those lives are something like we must create, we must like bring about. Otherwise, what else is there really to do with your life than just like, I don't know. I mean, you can pursue trying to climb the class ladder. You can pursue like trying to get the different toys, the house, the family, whatever. But it's like there's no beyond. There's nothing about like the ineffability of art. There's no risk in love, and politics just becomes like you voting every 4 years or something. So get out of bed, stop scrolling on your phone, touch grass, and all that.